I certainly don't have an answer for that, but let me emphasize that when intelligent design looks at evidence in the natural world and sees patterns, as Michael said, the end point of the inference is this object, this feature, appears to be design. I mean, really design, not just an illusion. How it was designed and by whom are additional questions, which are fascinating and significant. But the evidence for the design inference does not get us there. Now, I think there are fruitful ways to apply design in my field, cell and developmental biology. I'm in fact doing that presently, and I do it by, from within a design framework. I see what appears to be design. I assume then as a working hypothesis that something is designed, and I try to understand it from that perspective. And I do think that design theories presently are achieving insights, and I predict future breakthroughs. This is a promissory note, of course, from this perspective. But at this point, it's a fledgling enterprise, and I can't present you with any dramatic results.
Well, David Kelly has asked, you do epistemology, right? You're the David Kelly, yes. So you've asked the question, I mean, where the rubber meets the road. At some point, if you believe there was some form of supernatural intervention into our space and time, the finger has to come in and stir up the particles in some way to direct it or something, whatever it's supposedly going to do. And at that moment, it's legitimate for us to ask, how did he do it? What forces did he use? I mean, is he using electromagnetism or gravity or some other force we don't know about yet? Natural selection? What forces did God, whatever, using? That's a legitimate scientific question. So when we saw, for example, this business about intercessory prayer and the experimental group supposedly getting better from their heart surgeries than the control group because they were prayed for, this is an epistemological question. Can my prayers to the deity cause him to go right into the OR and tweak the cells in the heart or the plaque in the arteries or something better than the guys who didn't get prayed for? And the results were null. In fact, the group that was prayed for, that were told that they were prayed for, actually did slightly worse, which is rather telling. But really, that is the question that makes people nervous, because if you want to ask the question from a scientific perspective, it's perfectly legitimate for us to ask, how did it happen? What forces? And how can we measure it? Can we test it? That's what we do.
It's a legitimate question, but my point was that it's not a question within intelligent design theory. Intelligent design theory merely seeks to identify patterns that have the hallmarks of real design as opposed to illusory design.
Sigrid.
Hi, I'm Sigrid Fry-Revere. I work for CATO. I have a very practical question for you, for both of you actually, and it was based on experience I had with my children and a nanny we had who believed in intelligent design. She would tell my son every time he asked a question, because God made it so, all right? It was killing his curiosity. You'd ask him, why does it rain? Because God made it so. Why is the flower red? Because God made it so. Why should the child continue to ask questions about anything? So I fired her.
I think you did the right thing. That's the free market at work.
Can I comment on that? Well, I think that was a bad answer too, but that's not what intelligent design says. I would say the counterpart to that, which I've often heard being used with children, is evolution did it, which to me is no better than saying God did it. Either one is a curiosity stopper.
Right here.
Hi, Ken Green, American Enterprise Institute. I was also trained in the sciences, but I mostly studied policy, so I want to ask a very specific policy question to Dr. Wells. What exactly is it you wish to have changed in terms of the teaching of evolution? Do you wish either any disputed theory in a public school to not be taught, or all points of view to be taught? And is it only in science or also in theology? So should every class on religion include an equally rigorous course in atheism?
Well, as I briefly said in my remarks here a minute ago, I do think Darwinian evolution should be taught in science classes. I think it should be taught honestly with full acknowledgement of the problems it has with the evidence. And it has many. I mean, I've just mentioned a few here. I do not think it should be eliminated at this point, although I think the gentleman over here had a legitimate point that it often, in fact, carries a lot of atheistic baggage that does not belong in the public schools. I would love to see the public schools turned into private schools myself. I think with Mr. Shermer that would alleviate many of the problems here. But in the meantime, I think Darwinism should be taught, but it should be taught critically rather than as a doctrine that cannot be questioned.
I think another interesting point related to also the textbook writer earlier, how does anything make it into the science curriculum, for that matter? And I mentioned Lynn Margulis, who's a microbiologist and professor at UMass Amherst. And so she has this theory of symbiogenesis, in which the complex eukaryote cells that you and I are made out of were once, the little organelles in there were once themselves prokaryote cells, much simpler cells. This is why mitochondria has its own DNA, for example, which is really weird if you think about it, until you think about it in her theory. Anyway, Lynn's been, she's been working on this theory for 40 years, and it was very controversial for many decades. And she set up a lab, she got grants, she got graduate students, she did research, she published peer-reviewed papers, monographs, technical books, textbooks, popular books, going to conferences, popular speeches, and finally, after about 35 years, it's now just trickling down into the biological curriculum as a largely accepted but still mildly controversial theory about the origins of complex cells. So the answer is, you do what Lynn did. You roll up your sleeves and get to work and collect as much data and test hypotheses and go to conferences and so on. And that's how it's done, and that's how anybody does it. There's no czar that says you cannot introduce supernatural explanations and nobody allowed. There's nobody doing that. It's just science is this sort of collective enterprise in which you gotta, it's a sort of a free market. So you gotta get out there and sell your, and convince your colleagues that you're right.
And in fact, intelligent design theorists are doing that. Intelligent design as an organized body of theory is only a little over a decade old. So give us another 30 years and we'll be there too.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to take a question right here, and while the microphone is coming, I'm going to ask a question myself to both of you. As a layperson whose science education ended around the 12th grade, how do I decide between competing scientific theories that involve a great deal of knowledge that I don't necessarily have, or that I may not be willing to invest the time to read several books on both sides of every scientific matter? How should I decide what to think about scientific issues?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a plagiarist, I would say be skeptical.
Oh, no, that's all right. Here. I'll make you an honorary member of the Skeptics Society.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I would not trust the consensus of the experts, as I wouldn't trust the consensus of experts on almost any other topic. I would give it tentative approval, perhaps, but I would remain skeptical, especially when there's as much controversy about it as there is about Darwinism.
I deal with this all the time for my job at Skeptics, with any claim that comes down the pike. Like the most recent one on 9/11, the World Trade Center buildings, you know, shouldn't have collapsed the way they did. If a plane hit, they collapsed the way they did because of planted explosions inside, these little squibs that went off and so on. Well, I don't know anything about why buildings fall, so I had to go, you know, read and do research and look it up and talk to engineers and so on. And it was pretty obvious within, you know, 5 minutes that the conspiracy theorists are completely wrong. But in every point you had to check like that. So you go to the experts. Now, yes, the experts can be wrong, but that's what other experts are for, which is why we're seeing, I think, there's 2 new books out on string theory, Not Even Wrong and I forget the name of the other one, but they're both skeptical of string theory, and legitimately so. Within the confines of science, scientists going after each other. So you just sort of have to weigh the balance of, you know, which experts are saying this or that, or skeptical of each other, or is there a general consensus? With plate tectonics, for example,